Okay, so now we've talked about the RAS model. We've talked about the way people answer survey questions. And in case it didn't make sense before, when I say that people take a sample of the attitudes they have stored at the top of their head and the back of their head, what I mean by them taking a sample is that they go ahead and it's like, if you can imagine like a bowl of attitudes, just like sort of filled up in a bowl, and you were to like pick out at random a bunch of those attitudes and then like sort of look at them. That's what the idea is. That's what we mean by sample, that we're like randomly picking things that are at the top of our head. And a little bit from the back of the head. Don't forget about that. A little bit from the back of the head too. Okay? So the next part of this, and I don't know if this will, I'm doing this it's called face recognition. So as I move forward or back or side to side, the camera's moving. And I don't know if this is helpful or makes it worse. So I'll be the judge at the end, or you can tell me what you think about this if that's more distracting. Okay, so next I want to move to a different topic. It's if you look on your outline, it says univalence and ambivalence. Univalence and ambivalence. And those are both words that you probably haven't used before. And unless you're studying this kind of stuff, you probably won't ever use it again. And unless you're trying to impress your friends, you probably won't say it ever again. Okay, so I want to talk about the difference between people who are univalent. And remember, sort of, una means one. So univalent sort of means one. Like a valence is like sort of whether you have if you feel positively or negatively towards something, that's the valence towards the issue. So if you have basically one strong attitude, you're called, or one strong set of attitudes, you're univalent. And if you're ambivalent, that means that you have positive and negative stuff, positive and negative feelings about something. So univalence and ambivalence. So I want to talk about them both. When univalence and ambivalence, both of them, and I'll explain what they are in a second, when they go ahead and they answer survey questions, the process is exactly the same. It's what we've been talking about throughout this lecture, ever since I talked about the memory-based model and the RAS model. It's exactly the same. Univalence and ambivalence do the exact same thing. When they're asked a survey question, they don't like sort of process everything they have stored in memory. Instead, what they do is they take a random sample of the attitudes that they have at the top of the head and the back of the head. And most of the information that they sample comes from the top of the head and not so much from the back of the head. The stuff that's easier to pull from memory is mostly what we get. So if you can imagine, if maybe I have 100 things at the top of my head and 1,000,000 things at the back of my head, still, most of the stuff I'm going to draw, let's say, I'm making stuff up, 25 things from the top of my head and maybe 5 from the back of my head. So even though there's way more stuff in the back of my head, most of the attitudes that I'm going to get are going to come from the top of my head. So that's what we mean when we say we oversample the attitudes at the top of the head. We oversample them. We get more than if you added up all our attitudes about something. It may be that just 10% are at the top of our head and 90% are at the back of the head. But when we go ahead and make a decision, or when we're answering a survey question, it may be like 90% come from the top of the head and 10% come from the back of the head, right? So most of it's from what's up at the top of the head. So that's what we mean when we say we oversample from the top of the head and undersample from the back of the head. We're taking almost most of it from the top of the head. And then that's not the end of the process, because so if what I have in my head are feelings like whether I have positive or negative feelings about the president, I'm going to randomly sample the things that are at the top of my head, right? And there may be some positive things, some things I like. There may be some negative things, things I don't like at the top of the head. And then there's going to be some things in the back of the head. I'm going to pull a few of those out. And then I'm going to basically look at what I've sampled. I mean, we're doing this in our brains. I'm going to look at my sample, and I'm going to express an opinion based on that sample. So if I got mostly positive signs, I randomly pick stuff from the top of my head, randomly from the back of the head, put them together, kind of look at them and I say, oh, you know what, I got mostly positive things going on here. Then I'm going to say, oh, I approve of the job the president is doing. If I look and it's mostly negative, I'm going to say I disapprove. Okay, and that's the standard process that we've been talking about. Now, the key with the difference between univalence and ambivalence is that univalents are people with really strong, real consistent attitudes. In other words, if you looked inside their head, somebody who is univalent when it comes to President Obama, for example, they're going to have mostly positive feelings or attitudes at the top of the head and the back of the head, or mostly negative feelings at the top of the head and back of the head. But whatever it's going to be, they're going to be very one-sided, univalent. They're going to have one strong feeling, right? When univalents go ahead and encounter information, they flip on the radio, right, and they hear information. What univalents do is they only accept information they agree with. So, for example, if somebody who really hates President Obama is listening to the radio, he doesn't like President Obama at all, and he flips on liberal talk radio, and somebody's talking, and it's somebody who really likes President Obama, and he starts saying all these really positive things about President Obama. Look, the unemployment rate is going down. Look, he killed Osama bin Laden. If somebody's univalent and they really don't like President Obama, they're going to counter-argue. They're going to say, yeah, well, what about this? And what about that? And, yeah, he killed Obama, he killed bin Laden, but it was only because Bush laid all the groundwork for it. It wasn't really him, and it wasn't even Obama. It wasn't Obama anyways. It was the military. Why is he taking credit for it? That's the kind of thing that people who are univalent will do. If somebody loves President Obama, right, they're going to do the same thing. They're going to encounter information that is negative about President Obama, and they're going to counter-argue too. Someone's going to say, well, look how much our debt is, how high the national debt is. And they're going to say, hey, man, President Bush caused most of this with the decline of the economy and all that. So that's what people do. They counter-argue. They reject information that they disagree with. Now, think about that for a second. They have mostly positives. Let's say we'll talk about somebody who likes President Obama. They have mostly positives at the top of their head and the back of their head. When they hear negative information, right, they reject it. So they don't get a bunch of negatives in there. They just still have the positives, because every time some negative comes along, they pew, pew, and they knock it away, and they reject it. That was me doing a video game, by the way. That was me. That was the sound of pew, pew, knocking out things before they got inside my head, right? So they have mostly positive in their head, front of the head and back of the head. When they hear negative information, they reject it. Now, think about this for a second. They have mostly positive top of the head, mostly positive the back of the head. When they take a random sample of the attitudes that they have stored in memory, are they going to say that they, let's say in January you ask this person, do you approve or disapprove of the job President Obama is doing? Now this person's going to take, this univalent person who likes President Obama is going to take a random sample of the attitudes at the top of his head and back of the head. What's he going to say? Is he going to say, I approve or disapprove? Well, hopefully you said approve, or at least you thought approve. Yeah, he's going to say, I approve. Because when he takes a random sample, and if all he's got are pluses and mostly pluses at the back of the head, and he takes a random sample, what's he going to get? He's going to get mostly positives, like I approve. Now, that was in January. If you go ahead and you call him up again in February and you ask him the same question, and he goes through the same process of taking a random sample of what's at the top of the head and back of the head, what's he going to say? I approve. Right, he's going to go ahead and he's going to say, I approve again. And in fact, every time, if you call him in March and then April and then May, even as long as he's got mostly positives and not so many negatives, every time he takes a random sample, even though it's totally random, he's going to wind up having mostly positives when he takes his sample. Okay? And so the opinions they express are stable. You should mark that down.